Today on NewsWatch, deadly floods force people from their homes in South Carolina. See what's being done to help the victims. Plus,
people should know that where assisted suicide is legal, some people's lives will be lost without their consent through mistakes and abuse.
California legalizes patient-assisted suicide and pro-life advocates send a warning. We'll break down what the new law means and ministering in the wake of tragedy. See how pastors provide hope and healing after the deadly shooting in Oregon. Thanks so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. South Carolina's governor is warning residents more flooding and evacuations are likely. At least a dozen have died during this week's historic rainstorms in the Carolinas. The forecast actually calls for sunny weather today, but the concern is a massive rainwater working its way toward the low-lying coast. It took a Coast Guard chopper to rescue this mother and her 15-month-old baby. Father Ian Walt says even though their home is built on 8-foot stilts, the water rose too quickly.
It was one of those things where it was so chaotic, so fast.
It was already too late for 911.
And they said, there's nothing that we can do for you right now.
And their terrifying ordeal is the story of South Carolina this week.
There he goes.
This man was trapped in his 2-ton truck swirling in quick-moving water before a bystander helped to rescue him. 2 feet of water has been dumped on the state in 2 days. 16 inches fell on this creek area near Columbia Sunday. It was the rainiest day in one single spot in the U.S. in more than 15 years. The governor is warning her state to prepare for more flooding and evacuations as rainwater moves to the low-lying coast.
Just because the rain stops does not mean that we are out of the woods.
There's great concern about the potential for even more washed-out roads and bridges, thanks to poor and deficient infrastructure in many places. Some 40,000 people are also without drinking water, and there's no quick way to get them any. Operation Blessing has a convoy on the ground in Columbia. The goal? Help families wiped out by the flooding.
We're going to be mobilizing volunteers to go out into the flooded neighborhoods to do debris cleanup, pull out furniture, rip out sheetrock, flooded debris, and bringing it to the curb. We have our mobile command center, our mobile kitchen so that we can feed hot meals.
Going forward, it's a big job in South Carolina, from ongoing flooding concerns to cleanup in the aftermath. More than 500 roads and bridges are closed across the state, and 1,000 people are staying in shelters. California is now the 5th state in the U.S. to legalize assisted suicide. Monday, Governor Jerry Brown signed a bill allowing terminally ill patients to legally end their lives using doctor-prescribed drugs. The bill includes requirements the patient be capable of taking the medication themselves and that 2 doctors approve it. But opponents say the bill legalizes premature suicide.
People should know that where assisted suicide is legal, some people's lives will be lost without their consent through mistakes and abuse. No safeguards have ever been enacted or even proposed that can prevent that outcome, which can never be undone.
At least 24 other states have introduced right-to-die legislation this year, but the measures have not been approved. Israeli security forces demolished the homes of 2 terrorists overnight Monday. They had been responsible for killing 5 Israelis a year ago. Israeli security also sealed the home of a 3rd terrorist whose victim recovered. Israel uses house demolitions to deter terrorists. Monday night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his security cabinet approved new anti-terrorism measures in the face of an upsurge in attacks. Netanyahu said they were deploying a heavy hand against terrorism and also against the insiders. Along those lines, Israeli troops shot and killed 2 rock-throwing rioters, sparking more trouble across Israel. Russia's bombing blitz in Syria is raising new tensions with NATO after Russian military jets flew briefly into Turkey's airspace on 2 separate occasions. Turkey is part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was created to stand up to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And Russia's latest moves in Ukraine and Syria are reigniting concerns. The U.S. and NATO are struggling to figure out how to respond to Russia's increasing aggression.
Whether the Russian planes lock their
fire control radars on the Turkish planes is something I cannot comment on. The intelligence we have received indicates or provides me with reasons to say that it doesn't look like an accident what we saw in Turkey during the weekend.
The head of NATO also confirmed Russia's airstrikes are not mainly attacking ISIS, but other opposition groups like the ones who have been fighting Syria's dictator. Russia is also coordinating its efforts with the radical Islamic regime in Iran. Back here in the U.S., residents in Oregon are still struggling to deal with the aftermath of the Oregon shooting. When the attack happened, pastors and other first responders rushed to the staging area where survivors and their families were united. 3 of the area pastors that counseled on site that day sat down with CBN News to talk about ministry in the wake of tragedy and how God is leading their community forward.
For me and for our congregation, we are deeply challenged that if these 9 are willing to stand and take a bullet and confess their faith, then Christ followers at Garden Valley Church in Roseburg or anywhere can stand and live their faith out every day. The pastors that were summoned to the staging area, it was just an amazing display of God's grace and God's care for the community. There's 40 churches in Douglas County that are part of a network, and because we've been doing the work of building unity amongst ourselves, the payoff came in a crisis.
Actually, it was quite overwhelming. If you didn't stay focused on the one and you looked around, it was insane. I've heard this from 2 eyewitnesses. He asked, if you're a Christian or you have God, stand up. They stood up. And he asked them, are you a Christian and do you have God? And when they said yes, then he said, well, then this won't hurt. The others were scared now. And he demanded of everyone in the room, he was going down row by row, and he said, what's your religion? And they didn't even want to say a Buddhist or I'm a Jehovah's Witness or I'm a Mormon. They were frozen in fear, so he shot them multiple times. I don't see it as a Christian thing altogether, because there was other faiths there, and they got the same treatment as the Christians.
For a lot of the families that were there, that they were going to wait for another 5 or 6 hours just to find out that their loved one wasn't coming home. It was a pretty raw day. Everybody has got a story, and it's going to be days and weeks and months for a lot of these people to begin to walk through and find some health and healing.
And later here in this newscast, we'll hear from Pastor Randy Scroggins. His daughter survived the shooting in Oregon. He'll tell us her amazing story. It's an interview you don't want to miss. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and pro-life group Live Action is taking to social media to debunk the myth that Planned Parenthood provides mammograms. The abortion giant and supporters like President Obama have argued taking away federal funding would limit women's health care services. But this video, called Mammosham, shows Richards admitting before Congress they are not equipped or licensed to offer mammograms.
There are millions of women all across the country who rely on Planned Parenthood for not just contraceptive care, they rely on it for mammograms.
We do not have mammogram machines at our health centers, and we've never stated that we did.
So far, the video has 2.6 million views. To watch the full segment, visit us right here at cbnnews.com. And still to come, the Islamic State's plan to conquer Rome. Find out why ISIS is determined to behead the Pope and how they plan to get him. Fresh evidence radical Muslims are among the Mideast migrants flooding into Europe. A new report shows some of them are attacking Christians and other minority groups. The Gatestone Institute says police in Germany are now talking about segregating migrants by their different faiths. Iraqi refugees in a shelter in Bavaria report Islamists threatened their family daily. The father said, "They shouted at my wife and hit my child. They say, 'We will kill you and drink your blood.'" And an Iranian Christian said, "In the refugee shelter, I cannot admit that I'm a Christian or I would face threats. They treat me like an animal. They threaten to kill me." Meanwhile, the head of German intelligence said Salafist Muslims disguised as volunteers are trying to recruit migrants. You can find out much more about this at the Global Lane blog. It's at cbnnews.com. Well, you probably will not hear this in mainstream media, but one of the major goals of ISIS is to usher in the end of the world and the return of the Muslim Messiah, the Mahdi. A key part of their savage plan is conquering the city of Rome. And believe it or not, ISIS has a strategy to do it. Dale Hurd brings us this astonishing story from Rome.
The Islamic State has a plan to conquer Rome. Yes, it sounds crazy, but ISIS believes the conquest of Rome is central to its mission and necessary to fulfill what Islam teaches was the prophecy of Muhammad and to prepare the return of the Muslim Messiah, the Mahdi. Robert Spencer is the author of The Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS.
ISIS thinks that Rome is one of its primary goals and that it is in its timetable. It has a timetable wherein in the next 10 years, by the year 2025, it hopes to bring about Armageddon, the final struggle between good and evil, or between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. And that one of the chief stepping stones to that Armageddon battle is the conquest of Rome, which they think they're going to be able to do within the next 5 years, that is by 2020.
Muslim scholars say Muhammad prophesied that the two great Roman cities would be conquered, Constantinople and Rome. Constantinople today is Istanbul, a Muslim city. Rome remains to be conquered.
Once Rome is conquered, in this view, within the next 5 years, and then Israel will follow shortly after. They also believe that during this time period, they're going to conquer Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Now, before you laugh, consider that Phase 1 of the Islamic State's plan to take Rome may already be underway, flooding Europe with ISIS fighters under the cover of the refugee crisis.
They're not talking about doing it by conventional armies. They're talking about doing it by overwhelming these lands with sympathizers from within and an influx of other people from outside.
The Islamic State reveals part of its plan in its publication Black Flags from Rome. It will use sleeper cells and expects to get help from Muslims serving in European armies and from non-Muslim sympathizers. It also wants to fire missiles into Italy that it has captured on the battlefield. This is a threat that is hard to be concerned about for Italian and foreign policy expert Emanuele Ottolenghi.
The concern should be commensurate to the reality of the threat. The Islamic State does not pose that kind of a threat today.
He says Europe faces more pressing problems because of ISIS.
I think that the much larger threat that we are concerned with in Europe is with the lone wolf terrorist who plots a terror outrage against a school, against a supermarket, against a shopping mall, against an airport.
And it is hard to see how ISIS could conquer a city of 3 million people in a nation of 60 million people. But it is not hard to see ISIS attempting it. The conquest of Rome has been a primary goal since the beginning of the Islamic State.
They think that the conquest of Rome will be the complete sign of Islam's superiority over Christianity and defeat of Christianity.
They also see the fall of Rome on an eschatological timeline that will culminate in a battle near Dabiq, Syria, their version of Armageddon.
And they think that once this battle takes place at Dabiq, this final battle, which they see coming in by 10 years from now, in 2025, that the Muslims will battle the non-Muslims in this town in northern Syria, and then Jesus, the Muslim prophet, and the Mahdi will return to the earth, and they will together conquer and Islamize the world.
If their plan for Rome succeeds, ISIS says it will throw homosexuals from the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. But the chief target is Vatican City in Rome. And the main event, as they see it, will be the beheading of the Pope in St. Peter's Square, broadcast and live streamed to an international audience.
There was a Polish convert to Islam recently who has joined the Islamic State, and he said, once we take Rome, we're going to carry out mass beheadings in St. Peter's Square. And so this is the plan, to convert St. Peter's Square into a huge site of executions of people considered to be the enemies of Allah, chief among them the Pope, in order to cow and frighten the rest of the world into submitting to their rule.
It's a plan that for now has little chance of success. But in his new book, The ISIS Apocalypse, author and expert William McKent says ISIS has recently taken a longer-term view of the conquest of Rome and the return of the Mahdi, and is willing to wait in order to build up its forces. ISIS is already next door to Italy in North Africa. More importantly, Islamic State fighters are almost certainly already inside the country, some posing as refugees, going about their lives, waiting for the day when the battle for Rome begins. Dale Hurd, CBN News, Rome.
Up next, his daughter survived the deadly shooting in Oregon, and today, Pastor Randy Scroggins tells CBN News what he believes saved his daughter's life. Monday, we told you about Lacey Scroggins, the pastor's daughter who survived the Oregon school shooting because of a dying friend who covered her body with his own. CBN News' George Thomas spoke with her father, Pastor Randy Scroggins, by Skype. He gave a moving account of the young man's final act and how it saved his daughter's life.
There was a young man by the name of Trevin. They were all in the prone position. Their arms are out in front of them. Lacey's head is on her hands in front of her. And Trevin is right beside her, but about 12 to 18 inches above her. And at that point, the gunman actually comes to the center of the room, and he simply starts to shoot people either in the head or shoots them in the back. He just starts shooting. At that point, Lacey said, there was a gunshot that was so close to my head that my ears popped. My ears started to ring. I couldn't hardly hear anything. And then all of a sudden, she felt the weight of Trevin as his body shifted over onto Lacey's. She told me, she said, Daddy, she said, I could feel his body getting heavier and heavier and heavier as he put part of his body on mine. And then she said, Dad, I felt something so warm. And I looked down under my arm, and she said, I seen his blood coming out of him, and his blood was getting all over me, all over my arm, all over the side of me. And at that time is when the shooter came up behind my daughter, stood over her and said, get up. Get up. And Lacey, again, at that moment, told me I didn't know anything to do but to pray. And then she said, Dad, I knew I was dying today. He said to the lady next to Lacey, on the other side of Lacey, who he had already shot, he said to her, is this girl, referring to my daughter, Lacey, is she dead? The lady said, I don't know. And with that, he crossed over my daughter and shot the next individual.
You truly believe that Trevin's act truly saved her life, is that right?
There is no question in our minds that that shooter looked down, seen the blood of Trevin, on my daughter, and thought she was dead. His blood saved my daughter's life that day. I have no doubt of that.
Have you had a chance, sir, to speak with Trevin's family?
That was a beautiful conversation. It was on Saturday. I was actually doing an interview at the church. I had left my number for someone to get it to Trevin's parents. I did not feel like I had the right to intrude upon their lives at this time. So I made sure they had my phone number. During an interview, and I told them as soon as I get a phone call, if I get a phone call, I need to leave the interview. When that call came in, I left that interview and I went over and I answered the call, and it was Trevin's mother. She introduced herself. Of course, I introduced myself. Immediately, we begin to weep and to cry with each other. And I begin to share the events of how Trevin, in his last, I believe, conscious effort, put his body onto my little girl. And his blood spilled upon my little girl. And I believe that his body and his blood saved my daughter's life.
And Pastor Scroggins told us so much more in an extensive interview. You can see the full, unedited version. It's at our website, cbnnews.com. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Operation Blessing is helping women in Nepal to rebuild their lives. The deadly earthquake that hit Nepal earlier this year left people across the nation homeless and struggling to survive. Operation Blessing has been on the ground since then, providing aid. Teams recently opened a training center to teach women valuable skills to enable them to start their own small businesses and provide for their families. The training centers offer courses in cosmetology and cooking and sewing as well. All those things. You can learn more about Operation Blessing by going to ob.org. Well, it is now time for your Tuesday Tweetable. This is a message I hope will inspire you and inspire you to share it with others. Consider the excitement of a child when they see their parents after an extended time away. I get it from my daughter all the time. Today is a great day to get excited about spending time with your Heavenly Father. Many have been away from Him for far too long. Time in His presence is the key to making this a terrific Tuesday, regardless of any circumstance, problem, or issue you're facing. Well, that is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear from you. And while you're there, share what you think about the stories you've seen here today. We hope you will join us right here again next time. Once again, make this a terrific Tuesday. We'll see you tomorrow.